Welcome to the In Search of More podcast. I am your host, Ellie Nash. Join me weekly on my quest for more from myself and more from this world. We'll see you on the other side. Welcome, Madison.
Thanks for having me.
I am sitting with Madison Margolin, journalist and author of Exile and Ecstasy.
Yes.
Just came out yesterday.
Yes.
Well, not yesterday for the people watching this, but yesterday for
us.
For us.
Yeah.
Time is an illusion.
Exactly.
Let's start there.
I talk about that in my book.
Do you?
Well, I talk about, mysticism, the transcendence of time, how that sacred time in Judaism, all sorts of things like that.
Good. So that's where you play, kind of at the intersection of, is it play or work? What does it feel like?
Both.
Both.
Yeah. Judaism and psychedelics.
Judaism and psychedelics. You play at that intersection.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And you were kind of, if I understand correctly from the little I've heard about you, and your name has come up probably no less than 5 times in the last 6 months.
Cool.
So good that you're here. A few people recommend it specifically, and others just in passing, I guess, thinking that I would be interested in what you're doing. So I'm glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So it sounds to me that you were kind of born for this, into this. So can you talk about your upbringing and
totally. So I grew up in a sort of Jewish psychedelic family, you could say. My dad, so both my parents are hippies, right? My dad he's 82, and he started off as a criminal defense lawyer, specializing in weed. And so he got his start in the 60s, and 60s was a great time to get into drug law. And so his whole world was defending the hippies who were busted for cannabis and other drugs.
Gotcha.
Eventually throughout my childhood also, I would spend time in his office. I'd work in his office as a teenager. I was meeting people who were, getting busted for weed, for selling it, growing it. A lot of them kids my age even. And so fighting the drug war was a family value. But my dad, he had grown up in a pretty traditional Jewish household. And his older brother died of leukemia when my father was 13, 14. And then 6 years later, his father passed away also suddenly from an operation. And, he went to shul every day to say Kaddish, and he just didn't feel like he was clicking with the community, and the people there weren't there for him. And so he really got turned off to Judaism pretty much based on these sort of tragic events in his life. And so, fast forward 10 years later, he's a successful lawyer, and he's saying to himself, but what's it all about? Who cares? What's the point of life? You're successful, then you die. So what? I want to find meaning. And so he went on a sabbatical and went to India, first Israel and then India. And in India, he met haphazardly Ram Dass, the author of Be Here Now. Mm-hmm. And Ram Dass introduced him to his guru, Neem Karoli Baba or Maharaji. And my dad became a devotee. And, he came back to the States, reopened his law practice. And was his family, so to speak, became the satsang, or the community of devotees of Neem Karoli Baba. So I grew up in that world of people who had all had their psychedelic hippie experiences and were seeking to integrate it through that kind of spiritual path. And most of them were Jewish people of the post-Holocaust generation who were disillusioned, you could say.
Right. Most Buddhists in the U.S. are Jewish.
Yeah, I would say. Yeah. They call themselves Hindus, and at least our Hasidus is Hindu. But yeah.
And in terms of Judaism, when you say Jewish psychedelic, what was the
Jewish part of it?
What was the Jewish influence? Yeah.
Yeah, so the Jewish influence is that my parents sent me. My mom is from New York, so she's sort of basic Jewish mom from Queens. My grandmother's from Williamsburg. I had a lot of East Coast influence. And growing up, I went to Hebrew, a conservative Jewish preschool, day school thing. Eventually I went to public school, but stayed with, taking Hebrew school and having bat mitzvah and all of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of my Jewish upbringing, at least at home.
Gotcha. Over time, it became more observant. Your Judaism, your Jewish practice?
I think I've always, I don't know if, I guess you could say that on some level. I think I always really connected Jewishly. As a kid, I was obsessed with Holocaust literature. I don't really know why, but
still don't know why?
I could tell. I mean, I have theories why. I mean, if you want to get hippie, trippy, whatever, I do think that I've had people in those realm and like in healers or massage like
Yeah, yeah.
whatever, people tell me that they think I was like in a body, like my soul was in the body of someone who was in the Holocaust. It's crazy
Right.
that I'm even admitting this on,
No, I'm not surprised. I actually thought you would say that. I've heard it from others. I know.
but
My forget about those kind of stuff because that's intangible and hard to prove. But my wife, from a very young age, was very, very connected to the Holocaust. Was just something about it that struck something deep inside her, and you can call it past life, you can call it ancestors, you can call it whatever. But
yeah, so that was me as a kid. I was also really obsessed with Anne Frank. I impersonated her in a living biography book report, and again, she was a writer. She was relatable. She was a young girl. Like she was really, there was a lot of resonance there. Um, and then, my parents, they had all been raised in sort of traditional Jewish households, and claiming that they weren't connecting to Judaism. And then I see them sitting around on cushions on the floor, chanting in Sanskrit during a kirtan, which is like a Hindu chanting event. And I'm saying, oh, you couldn't connect to Hebrew, but Sanskrit you understand? Like, what's this all about? And so from a really young age, because I was rebellious and just looking at my parents and not as like, oh, they're hippie, Hindu, whatever thing is so cool. But I was embarrassed. Like all my friends were coming from normal families, and I was in LA, so it was just like nice Jewish families, a lot of Persians. Like no one was doing what my parents were doing.
gotcha.
And I said to myself at that point, I was like, there has to be something in Judaism that my parents are looking for in other places, like Hinduism or, psychedelics or whatever it is. Like they just don't know that it's there in Judaism, or maybe they rejected it.
Why were you so sure of that?
I just intuited it. Like, I mean, I didn't know, but I made the assumption that like
Right.
every religion had to have its own path of mindfulness and meditation and
Was there any
spirituality.
part of it that you gravitated to as a child that you enjoyed? Was there something
Of Judaism,
nice about it? Not Judaism,
the
more
Hindu thing,
the Hindu stuff.
the community and the music, which I realize having now spent a lot of time in more like Heimish circles, it's actually like the same model, right? Of like a chevra and a satsang, right? Or sitting around for kirtan versus a Farbrengen, like having a guru and having a rebbe, just a very familial way of relating to each other, and that's what I gravitated to. And I also knew that I wanted it. My dad, sometimes we lived in a very Jewish neighborhood, and sometimes my dad would take walks with me around the neighborhood on Shabbos or whatever, and we'd just wander into an Orthodox shul and hear people singing. And he was really drawn also to like the musical aspects of Orthodoxy, even though he, kind of had rejected Judaism at one point. Um, he he still saw that there was like something to it. At least they know what's going on. Is basically what he would say.
Oh, I got you. Meaning the truth is here, but they have some semblance. The truth is where he was with Hinduism, but there's some semblance of that or something they picked up.
Yeah, I mean,
these other things.
I think he honestly, both my parents now are like having their own sort of like Baal Tshuva moments in a weird way, but they never were disrespectful toward Judaism. It was always just like they hadn't found communities in the Jewish world that worked for them, and so they went,
Right.
in that direction. But they always knew that like there was a truth that Judaism put forward that maybe they hadn't been exposed to, but it's there. So there was
Got
a
it.
reverence.
There was a reference for Judaism, but
For sure. Yeah.
yeah, just we haven't found it.
My grandfather founded two shuls in the valley. So,
Gotcha.
my mom's family are just, New York Jews.
Right, and I understand that sometimes in circles of people who grew up religious, it's hard to find spirituality.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
My parents, they didn't grow up like so from, but they did, like kosher and Shabbos and whatever. So
Oh, so that was part of it growing up as well.
for me,
Yeah.
I mean, we weren't like, we weren't like from about it, but we were doing it, if that makes sense.
Kosher was the thing. Shabbos was the thing.
No, for my parents and
Oh,
for my
them.
grandparents. But for us, like we didn't, I mean, we were vegetarian. So it was like automatically
Right,
kosher
right.
in a way.
But kosher wasn't. But there was still the Jewish school, and there was
Yeah, like a Jew. It was
connection
at
to it.
first I was in Jewish school, and then I went to regular to whatever public school with Hebrew school on the
Right.
side, and then we weren't like dafka kosher, but like it's not like my parents were bringing in like shrimp or bacon or anything like that. Like there was like understanding of what kashrus was, and for Shabbos, like they weren't necessarily keeping Shabbos, but we were doing Shabbat dinner or living in a neighborhood where everyone in the neighborhood was walking to
Understood.
shul.
Okay, yeah, I'm just trying to get a picture because you talk a lot about not. I haven't seen that much of your work, but enough in your autobiography about the way you grew up. So I just wanted to get a picture of it for how it kind of set stage for who you are today.
Yeah.
Is there a Jewish name?
My Hebrew name?
Yeah.
Margalit Rachel.
Margalit Rachel, but you stuck with Madison for
There are people who prefer to call me by my Hebrew name.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, good, fine. So continue on your. There was Judaism was calling to you, the Holocaust.
Yeah. So okay. So right. So I was always like drawn to Judaism just in general. Like I hated Hebrew school, but I loved Judaism. And I also wanted to. I was my dad is really like. Both my parents, they're not observant, but they're both very religious, if that makes sense. My dad's always talking about God. He's obsessed with God. And he has a very, like, almost like Hasidic soul to him. So, again, I was sort of primed for ending up in these types of circles.
When you got to those circles, they felt very familiar.
Exactly, like totally familiar. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I write about this in my book, like, Ram Dass and Reb Zalman, and there was like all this kind of resonance that I think the people who I grew up with, had they not gone to India, they would have ended up on like the Moshav, for instance, like in that kind of world. And recently I actually just took my dad to Israel, and he kind of confirmed it as well and said something like, I made one mistake 50 years ago. I left Israel. And so he went to India after that. But yeah, so pretty much fast forward, I was in journalism school. I was at UC Berkeley. After Berkeley, I lived in Israel for a while. Israel-Palestine's like a hot topic at Berkeley. It doesn't matter if there's a war going on or not. They'll make it about it. And so I was curious. I was just wanted to better understand Israel. And so I went to Israel, was living there in Tel Aviv, which was great. Like I had a lot of fun, but I visited Sfat here and there, and I kind of was starting to get a little bit more curious about what's
Yeah, I see it. Okay.
what's there.
Yeah.
And then
it has that. It draws you in, or certain people. It just
totally
kind of
draws me in. I'm like totally at home in Sfat. And then I ended up in journalism school, and every kid in the class had to cover a different ethnic community. And so my beat was the Hasidic community in Brooklyn, because I was one of 2 Jews in the class. And so they basically made me do it. Like I wanted to do the Russians in Brighton Beach, but they're like, no, you're going to take the Jews.
Okay.
And I went to Williamsburg, and I, like made sure I was Sneezestick, and I forgot to take off my nail polish and all my earrings. So obviously it was a giveaway that I wasn't really part of the community. And I had a really hard time reporting there because no one would talk to me. I was buying a bunch of rugelach or pizza or whatever I could, just to talk to someone at the cash register, but pretty much.
What was the idea? What were you looking for?
It was like, this was my very first week of journalism school. It was just like reporting 101, like go to the neighborhoods and like find the story. And I'm like, they're like, just go. I didn't know what I was looking for. I was just going there and seeing what was up pretty much. At the end of the class, I started out in Williamsburg, and then I was just like, this is challenging. So I went to Crown Heights, which I think is kind of like cheating.
Yes.
Because they obviously want to talk to me over there. But in Williamsburg, I ended up talking to a guy who was working at a kosher pizza place, and he was on the spectrum of OTD, like off the derech, I guess, for the audience, if they don't know that.
Just less religious, moving away from the observant path.
Yeah. And I basically was going to interview him about his like OTD journey or something. And that was the story I wrote for that class. But on our very first interview, he completely flaked, and I was kind of upset about it. And then he rescheduled. He's like, oh, sorry, I was at a Psytrance festival. It was like really high. And I was like, wait a minute, like that's way more interesting. And so he basically through him, I met another person who has become a good friend. I've known him now for 10 years. And they were telling me about all these like Hasidic psytrance festivals
What are they?
upstate. Like Hasidic, like
Side trance?
psytrance.
What is that?
Like psychedelic trance music.
Oh, okay.
So basically, like people going, like it's just festivals, music festivals.
Gotcha.
And they were, how groups from Brooklyn or Muncie or whatever would go and whatever. And at that point in my life, I was, I'd been to a bunch of festivals like psytrance and whatever. I'd never really come across Yiddish speakers there, but okay. And I was just really fascinated. And I said to myself,
so it wasn't just one guy. There was a movement.
It was at that point, it was a small movement, but there was like a crew. And I stumbled upon this crew. And I said to myself, because I had also done a lot of psychedelics already at that point. Like I'd, tripped a lot in Berkeley. I wrote a research paper on psychedelics when I was in college. Like, I was psychedelically aware. But I said, knowing how much psychedelics dig up what's already inside you, how could somebody coming from such a Jewish background not have Judaism factor in to their trips at some point or another? That was my question. And so I set out to sort of explore, like, can you have a Jewish experience with psychedelics? Like, can there be something about the psychedelic experience that feels inherently or naturally or specifically, explicitly Jewish? And this following semester in journalism school, I said, I'm going to return to this story. I feel a little bit more comfortable. I don't care if the professors think I'm crazy for writing about this. And I put a call out to Facebook looking for experts in Judaism and psychedelics. And someone refers me to Yosef Needleman, who wrote Cannabis Hasidus, which is a memoir manifesto about weed and whatever, Hasidus. And he introduced me to people. He was living in Israel. He introduced me to people in New York who became just some of my best friends. And I met them, at the start, I said to myself, when I first met them, I said, whoa, these aren't people I want to like objectively write about and then move on. Like here I am at Shabbos with them and they're inviting me back for Lag BaOmer and they're, like this is my chevra. Like I realized like I was just like mishpacha with these people and it felt so familiar. Like they felt like the people I knew from back home. And I learned that there was common resonance, between some of the figures. And, Ramdas, I think, hung out at the Moshav or something like that. And then aside from the psytrance Hasidim, I got connected to some people who were doing ayahuasca ceremonies and blending that with nigunam and, doing it on Shabbos or whatever, like it was in a Jewish framework and a Jewish fabric of the ceremony. And it just completely changed my relationship to Judaism.
In what way?
Yeah, I remember one ceremony in particular. I do think there was one ceremony only that we did on Shabbos. I'm pretty sure because we sang the Chadodi, if I'm recalling correctly. And like, because I did this ceremony on Shabbos, I was able to feel Shabbos differently. Like I was just sort of tuning into like what Shabbos really has the potential to offer and to be. And
very interesting.
Heschel writes about this as like, palace in time. And I was just in Shabbos in a different way than I'd ever been before. And because I did it on Shabbos, then Shabbos became my integration afterward. So my whole methodology with tripping and ritual and whatever is take something from the psychedelic experience as a souvenir and use it, practice it, whatever in your regular life to kind of remind you of that psychedelic consciousness because now it's sort of been infused with it. So for me, Shabbos
became that thing.
Yeah, and so the music would take me right back there. And because we were singing Nigunim and we were singing the same things that we were also singing just at a regular kumsitz or whatever, like it was kind of keeping the consciousness of the medicine alive for me without having to do medicine, but also deepening my relationship to Judaism. And
fascinating, because I've always had psychedelics has brought me much closer to Judaism, for sure. It's definitely enriched it in a lot of ways, but I've always kind of stayed away from kind of blending the two in that not forceful, but in that obvious way.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it doesn't have to be so obvious. Like there are times where, I was just...
I'm not saying for good or bad, just instinctively.
Yeah, I mean, like sometimes it can be obvious, right? Like Shabbos is the set and setting. Both the setting is obvious, right? Like what songs are
Right.
you singing? What time is it of the day? Like what's the food, whatever. And the set is your really in your internal space and like really being in Shabbos. Like what does that mean? But there have been other times when I'm tripping where it's like, I would practice something like Hesbodadus or, be davening or dancing in a certain way. And it wasn't, a Dafka Jewish setting, but like like it did help me.
The less Yiddish and Hebrew words you can use possibly
Yeah.
for some listeners
So it
might be easier.
wasn't in non-explicitly Jewish settings.
Right.
I also was able to like refine my prayer and dancing and things that felt really spiritual, even though it wasn't couched in the framework or setting of Judaism, so
Got
to
it.
speak.
Before that very first experience, kind of blending the two, Judaism and psychedelics, where were you with Judaism?
I was pretty involved at that point still. I mean, throughout college, I was like doing Shabbos every week, like going to Hillel. Sometimes I'd pop into Chabad. I was writing for the Berkeley Jewish Journal or whatever. So I was always, you know, I always felt like it was like I was almost like born with this like lobotomy, meaning to say like I feel like that a part of my brain has been missing because there's a lot about Judaism that I don't know, and I feel like I have the
And you still
capacity.
feel that?
I mean, hopefully I'm learning more each day, but
Right.
like I feel even the fact that like my Hebrew is terrible, like I feel like I should know this, and there's a part of my brain and my mind and my soul that like does know it or should or whatever, and I'm just trying to like fill in the gap.
Very interesting. What an interesting thing. So, have you found? It sounds like psychedelics has enriched your Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
Has it gone the reverse in the sense that Judaism has enriched the benefits psychedelics has brought?
Yeah, actually a lot, because I used to freak out when I would do psychedelics. Like in Berkeley, well, my very first psychedelic trip was like the best day of my life. It was mushrooms, and it was just totally mystical. I remember saying to myself like, "Oh, like be here now, I get it," and because I had rebelled so much against be here now. But throughout my time at Berkeley, I'd gotten into situations that were really less than ideal for psychedelic experience, and I really freaked out. I'd have anxiety attacks on acid, or just at certain points, just didn't even feel safe doing psychedelics.
Right, makes sense.
And doing it again, I actually, when I did ayahuasca for the first time, I hadn't tripped in a really long time. I think I'd been a little traumatized from this acid trip in Berkeley and just was staying away for a while. And I, something about doing it in a Jewish space felt so grounding and so safe. Like if God is with you, like and God's always with you, but if that's part of the conversation around you, for me, it helped me so much feel more comfortable to go deep into the space and like,
Awesome.
yeah.
Neat. And so keep taking me through the story, because it sounds like you've been pulling at this psychedelic and Jewish thing much further than you've explained so far.
Yeah, so I was in journalism school, graduating, working, at the Forward and also at the Village Voice covering weed. At that point, New York was legalizing medical marijuana. So I always had this dual like Jews and drugs thing going on. But in my personal life, I was really like partying and Shabbosing and, doing all of that in Jewish spaces and both getting high and also grounding in the context of Jewish community and Jewish religion. And I knew I was journaling about it personally, like, and, no one sees those journals ever, but
Right.
I knew that there was a story there because I was just endlessly fascinated by it. And I also knew that it felt like it had something to do with the story that I grew up in with the Ram Dass thing. And meanwhile, like, again, on personal notes, like I was like 20 something in New York City, like just living and learning about life. And this was all sort of part of the constellation of like what I was going through as just growing up, right? Like after grad school, like just being in life and finding my way as a freelance journalist, or I had different jobs that I took here and there. And yeah, like I always kept it at like I started getting a little bit more refined and noticing like, okay, this is a story, but how do I write about it? Because the people who I was doing psychedelics with were my good friends, and I wanted to protect the community and keep it underground and not out anybody. And so I felt like I had a responsibility to actually not write about it in the ways that I wanted to because of the safety of the community. And also the whole Jewish psychedelic thing was not a thing yet. Like there was no WhatsApp group or Jewish Psychedelic Summit, which I co-founded, or it didn't have the same like crystallization that it has now. So again, I was finding opportunities here and there to write about it. Like I would do a one-off story, or eventually I did this story on like I think I called it the Summer of Love in Yiddish, about these sort of psytrance festival things and as a phenomenon. And yeah, and then I knew that I wanted to like make sense of it and make peace with it in myself. So I ended up by serendipity getting a book agent, and he saw a story and helped me put the proposal together and pitch it out, and I got a book deal.
Cool.
And yeah, I'll say go
yeah.
on.
No, go ahead.
Just the final piece, the epilogue, so to speak, is that I went to Tzfat to write my book. Like I was writing it in Brooklyn and basically rewrote the entire thing in Tzfat in like a month and last year. And part of it is not about doing the psychedelics all the time. It's just like living a life that reflects psychedelic and Jewish consciousness. And I experienced that most in Tzfat. Like I feel like being there is like,
it's a psychedelic trip, it for sure is.
Yeah, it's like it's in the air, like it's being a cloud of acid. It's like who needs the drugs? Like just go to the mountaintop, and I feel also really embodied there at the same time. So it really has me questioning like, what does psychedelic even mean, right? Like it's something that I think connects us to our souls and gives us a heightened experience of our soul as in a body. So there's an embodiment piece and also a soul piece, and it does mind manifesting, as they say,
right.
But I think it goes beyond the mind, really. And so
the mind is bigger than the mind. The mind's not the brain, the mind.
Yes, exactly. So I guess the point of what I write about isn't to get people to do more psychedelics, but really to integrate the ethos and the consciousness into their regular lives and live by it.
What is the message you want people to take away from your book, or do you want someone to read your book to get that?
No, that's the message.
This is the message.
The message is apply it, like put it into practice.
So who are you speaking to? Someone who's never done psychedelics, someone who has and struggling connected to Judaism, someone Jewish who's not living psychedelic consciousness, all of the above?
All of the above.
All of the above.
I think a lot of different types of people will resonate. It'll resonate with different parts will resonate with different people.
What is the men think in terms of problems and solutions, right? So what is the problem your book is solving? What is someone not knowing that when they know this, it changes their life in some way? Yeah. Or is it pure entertainment?
No, it's not pure entertainment. The problem is like, does this shit actually work?
Which one? Psychedelics
the medicines,
or Judaism?
The psychedelics, the spirituality, the religion, like all of it. Like, why are we doing this to ourselves? Or what are we doing it for fun? Why are we doing
Judaism to ourselves? Why are we doing psychedelics? Why are we doing all of it?
Any of it. Any or all of it. Like, and I use myself as a character to explore, like, what are we doing? What's the point? Like, tachlis, like, direct, right? Like, why are we doing this? And so, because like I said, I grew up in this kind of like psychedelic household community. And I also I had a lot of trauma as a kid. Like my parents are divorced, and the way that was handled wasn't great. And I saw sort of the backside of the psychedelic and spiritual community. And I saw the way people were treating each other, which wasn't always love and light and blessings. And I was really skeptical and kind of thought everyone was And I was also in LA, so I thought everyone was fake.
Okay.
And so I was like, I don't care if you're doing plant medicine or meditating or you're so spiritual and you wear it on your sleeve, whether it's because you're a white person wearing a bindi or wearing a talus or whatever it is, like how is how is this spirituality or psychedelic experience impacting the way you move through the world and treating other people? And so that's really the question. And are you healing yourself and are you acting healthy? And how are you then being of service towards something beyond yourself?
Is psychedelics for you healing? Is it spirituality? Is there no difference between the two?
It's all of the above, and I don't think that there is as much of a difference or distinction as people like to talk about it in that way. And I think that's the sort of a fault of Western thinking and Western medicine, where it's like, you see this with the marijuana movement. It's like medical marijuana or recreational marijuana. And it's like, you could have something can be medicinal and be fun. And having fun can also have therapeutic elements to it and spiritual elements. And I think you see like the interplay of spirituality, recreation, and healing as one and the same, more so in less Western contexts of medicine. And so, yeah, it's all of the above.
There's a letter of the Rebbe, which I'm sure has been shared with you because it's been shared with me um, tens of times, where it seems like the question he's getting, or he got, was whether taking LSD is appropriate for mystical experiences. And, it's kind of like a Rorschach, this letter. You see whatever you want to see.
Mm-hmm.
So someone who's supportive of psychedelics and thinks that it can be helpful will say, oh, look, within this letter, it says that, these compounds would only have place if there was physical healing or healing that can come as a result, but not for mystical experiences. So assuming he's a teacher who you look at his word as the final word, as the way a lot of Chabad people do. Do you understand that distinction he's making between the mystical experience and the
Yeah, and I think
physical healing? You're familiar with the letter I'm referring to?
I'm familiar with it, and I think Reb Nachman also says something. I don't want to say similar, but there's a similar sentiment at the end. The takeaway is the same, where it's like to think that a substance or something will do the same thing every time, almost like borders on avodah zarah or idolatry, in that the substance isn't what's making you spiritual or even healing you. It's yourself. It's what's opening it up. It's opening you up to. And so maybe it's opening a door, but you still have to walk the path, and you still have to walk the path that's going to, connect you to God. And to think that any sort of physical thing is your access point to God is kind of ridiculous. Like, it's so not what Judaism is about. But I also think so much of our religion is using embodied techniques for spiritual transcendence and ascent, even through wine, the ultimate original plant medicine of the Jewish people.
So are we using wine in that way? There's certainly the ritualistic aspects of wine. Yeah, we're not taking it for healing, that's for sure. No one's taking it for healing. Unless, like you say, which I respect the position, that demarcation between spirituality and healing is very hard to
I think that if you have a
make.
spiritual experience, it encompasses healing, even if that's not the original intention.
Right.
And I can explain this scientifically if
Go ahead.
necessary. Yeah, so there's studies going on right now at Johns Hopkins and other research centers looking at psilocybin or other compounds for a variety of indications: anxiety among terminally ill patients, depression, PTSD, addiction, whatever. There's also a study looking at psilocybin for religious professionals. And what they're doing through that study is evaluating the quote unquote mystical experience. And so scientists have delineated what a mystical experience actually is: sense of oneness, transcendence of time and space, a sense of awe, a noetic quality, like feeling more real than real, deeply felt positive mood. And what I found, or as I've studied it and researched it, and also experienced it, is when you're having a mystical experience, it's an opportunity for the nervous system to relax. Like when you feel like you're in God's hands, the part of you that's like holding on tight can just like breathe. And so, when we're always kind of going between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, when we're able to activate the parasympathetic, which is our rest, digest, repair, rather than sympathetic, which is like our fight, flight, freeze, trauma state.
Mm-hmm.
When we're spending more time in para, our bodies actually have an opportunity to heal. So mysticism and spirituality, if they allow us to get into like those more relaxed states of the body, how is that not healing?
It could be very healing. I guess the question is, why is someone doing it? I mean, if I had to explain it from that perspective, what's the reason someone is doing it? So if someone is dealing with an issue that's frustrating their ability to live properly in this world, whatever that means, and that's where I take issue with people, is where they want an issue to be so large by the person who's observing its standards.
Mm-hmm.
So, is it leading to suicide? Is it leading to depression where they can't work? I don't know. Maybe it's leading to just a little bit of anxiety, just a little bit, and it's too much for this person. Or maybe the person is not finding purpose, and that's frustrating their ability to live properly. When someone chooses to say that I want to heal, like that to me sits squarely on the person who wants to heal. But there is something that they're looking to heal. So if you ask, what's your intention, your experience, maybe their relationship is not where it's at. Maybe their purpose in life is not where it's at, or maybe it's much more serious, where they're struggling with an addiction that they can't kick and has life-threatening consequences. But there's something, versus I'd like to deepen my connection with God, right? If that was
Mm-hmm.
the intention, that would be, hey, you're looking for mystical experience, maybe there's a different way to do that. That's how I would kind of explain the letter.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think, it's just as you're talking, it's reminding me of, so many people, especially like Balchuvas, or, who have had such wayward paths to, again, I gravitate toward Breslov, and you look at, all the Nanachs out there, and well, who were they before they were Nanach, right? And like, there is something inherently healing about finding spirituality. And it might be that they found a more religious path or more spiritual insights, and that then healed.
Oh yeah,
I'm
not questioning that at all.
Yeah.
I think the entire 12-step movement is based on this idea.
Exactly.
Carl Jung said, spiritus contra spiritum, right? It's the spirituality to counteract the strength of the spirits, wine and spirits.
Mm-hmm.
So for someone who's finding their meaning and their purpose and their highest power in alcohol,
well, there is
spirituality can counteract that.
Totally. And there is something also to the other point that you're making, which is a story that I did maybe 8 years ago at this point. But I was interviewing pretty like straight rabbis about psychedelics, because there is like the person who's already kind of spiritually oriented, who's like, okay, how can I get closer to God? What, like, maybe now psychedelics are what I'm going to do or something. And so, I was interviewing these rabbis, and it sounded like the idea is like, you can take a psychedelic, and if you incidentally have a spiritual experience, okay, but don't like go into davening, like don't take it in order to daven. Like, you should be able to come to like your spiritual path or davening or praying with a kind of like clear head, right? And
I think that is a Jewish law also, is not to pray
exactly
intoxicated or inebriated. And that's what I was saying I've had an aversion to from the beginning. I was, a number of years ago, a few friends were coordinating a trip to Costa Rica, ayahuasca weekend, and one of my friends said, I'd really love to have a chazan there. And it's just, I thought it'd be amazing if, we can do a Friday night ceremony and sing Kabbalah Shabbos and all the things. And I was like, it's not for me. It's exactly what I don't want. Not because I don't like those things. I do. I enjoyed, even at that point in time, where I was in my life, and I wasn't as connected to Judaism as I am today, but I didn't um, I didn't like the idea of mixing the two, and I liked each of them independently. But now that you're saying this, there's a experience I had, which I've spoken about a number of times on this podcast, which was really related to kind of childhood trauma, and then seeing how it interrupted my relationship with Shabbos specifically, and I became aware of that on a journey. But now that you mentioned this, that trip was on Friday night. Now I didn't think of that, but
Right. I mean, there's also Shabbos, I think itself is healing, right? Like, and I think there's also, it's funny because what you're saying today, when I think about all of these, ayahuasca circles and the more from world, people are often referring to it as prayer. Like, there's just like, it's a prayer circle. That's like the lingo that I've
right.
heard. So it's funny to.
I think the American Indians will call a peyote ceremony a prayer. We're doing a prayer. We'll use
Exactly.
It. Yeah,
so,
they use that language.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the Rebbe would say about that, but.
Right.
But one other question I have, or that I think about, is like, what is the point, right? Like, sometimes people, like you could take DMT or ayahuasca and talk to God. And I have seen it be the case and almost experienced it myself, where it's like you could get a little too close, right? Like it's too much light, or it could be like why, like, someone once told me a story about like taking DMT and like feeling like touching the sun, like it was like almost like all this light, but it was like too much, and how you could get burned. And so the question is like, is it masturbatory, right? Like, do we need to be on this level? And like, well, how is that serving us versus like being down here on earth or in regular mundane life, and like being able to appreciate not the sun itself, but the light that comes from it, using the sun as like a metaphor for spiritual source.
I think it depends where someone is.
Yeah.
Shais Taub has this line. He says that an addict is like everyone else, only more so. Mm-hmm. One. And the second is, for an addict, spirituality is a necessity, while for the average person, spirituality feels like a luxury. Not that it is a luxury, it feels like a luxury. So some people really can't do without it. And I understand that. I think that if someone, and this is an objective measure, but if someone has experienced a significant amount of pain in life to the point that they're sitting there with the question of, why did this happen to me? They're really in that victim consciousness. And if they don't connect to God, the randomness of their experience can just be too painful. Meaning, if they're sitting with the belief that what happened to them was random, it's just too much pain. And so why did I get this stick? Why did I draw this stick? Why did I draw this lot? Why did I have such a horrible experience? And as soon as one is able to touch spirituality and then the question of, hey, maybe there was a reason for the thought. Maybe there was a reason for this. Maybe there was a guiding hand behind all of this pain and suffering. And there's somewhere it's moving you towards that can be beneficial to yourself and others. Once that question can be introduced, then healing can set in. And without that, someone can go in circles for years of, why did this happen to me? Why did this happen to me? Why did this happen to me? Why did this happen to me?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I wonder though, like I've experienced that myself, and then I'm like, wait, am I just telling myself this? Like
telling yourself?
Just, like, oh, there's a reason behind it. God has a plan. And it's like, it's so comforting sometimes, but then you can poke, you can say, am I just saying this, right?
I can tell you how I answer that for myself. Is that, let's say it is, the belief, either belief will prove to be correct. So for example, right, so I've done this, the big question I had, coming into adulthood is why I had to experience sexual abuse for a number of years, right? So that was my why did this happen to me? When I finally met the guy who abused me, that was my question for him. I sat down with him and I prepared for weeks to have this conversation. And my first question for him is, why of all the little kids on the block did you choose me? So that was that kind of big question. Now, let's flip that on its head, and I start asking myself, for what reason did this happen to me? And I say, hey, maybe there was something really meaningful. Maybe I'm meant to help other people who experience the same thing. Maybe there was something that I couldn't have learned if not for this. And then I embark on a path of sharing my story and helping abuse victims and everything else. Now, someone from the outside looking at the version of me that's sitting in the question till the end of life, that's never resolved. The meaning has never been found in my life, and it's someone looking at the outside doesn't see the meaning either. So that story will be true. That person will die, not having found meaning, and till the end of time, till the end of their life, the question will remain of why did this happen to me? It's an unresolved. There was no meaning found in their story, and you look at that person, and they've passed now, and you say, why did they go through so much suffering? There was no benefit, not to them or others. It just seemed all negative. Whereas someone who chose the belief of maybe their specific meaning and then made choices accordingly, and then created whatever it was, right? The version of me that is doing this today, a lot of it was led by those choices. So then I've proven out the theory of that belief. So today I sit there, I think both are true. You want to believe that it's completely random, then you will prove the theory perfectly that everything is random. You want to choose that it's meaningful, then you will prove the theory perfectly of everything is meaningful. I don't think there's one truth or the other. They're both true.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's also what psychedelic thinking is being able to hold multiple truths and allow them to be. And
Right. That is true.
Yeah.
That is true. My first, very first experience I had, I saw every single disagreement at the time. There's new ones now, but every single disagreement I had with my wife and her perspective. But it didn't become her perspective was right and my perspective was wrong. It became her perspective and my perspective, and then being able to see the multiple perspectives in between and seeing them all with equanimity. There was no, oh, I see where she's coming from with that. And then I saw where I was coming from, and they were all true. Yeah. There's a truth there. There's a truth there, a truth there, a truth there. Yeah. And many in between. Right. So I see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. The thought behind, you said you were a co-founder of the Jewish Psychedelic Summit.
Yeah.
What is that about? Is that the same drive as the book? Is it the same intention?
Yeah, I mean, at the point when I co-founded that, along with Natalie Ginsburg, who works at MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and Rabbi Zach Kamenetz, who now has founded Shefa, which is a Jewish psychedelic integration nonprofit, or it's Jewish support, or psychedelic support nonprofit, I should say, not just integration. It was kind of articulating something that was already happening, but giving it more explicit identity. So I'd been writing at this point a lot about Judaism and psychedelics and various stories. And there were a few other people too who were doing things that felt, whether academically or experientially or whatever, in that realm. So we made this online 2-day summit. Was it 2 days? Yeah, I think. Anyways, we made this online summit and just brought together all these voices, and it was about, were there entheogens, like substances that elicit psychedelic experience in, biblical times,
And do you think there were?
Yes.
Do you have support for it?
So this is, and I think also you had Rabbi Harry on.
I did have Rabbi Harry.
This is like a Rabbi Harry topic, but. So yeah, as I understand it, for instance, the Jews or the Hebrew tribe learned acacia extraction technology from the Egyptians. Acacia is a shrub native to the Middle East that contains DMT. So we have reason to believe that DMT plants were part of Jewish, or were used at least. There was also the idea about being in the Holy of Holies, how the high priest would be in there with the Ketoret, and it was, I think, being burned on acacia coals. And I also have heard that there might have been cannabis as part of this smoke riser.
And the suggestion is that he may have gotten high from the incense, from the smell.
Yeah, like he was hotboxing himself in the chamber, and he couldn't, he had to be completely full of smoke, and there was a chance he was going to pass out, and all this, all of that.
Right, that suggestion.
Did
Right.
that come out up in the Rabbi Harry episode?
You mentioned it, yeah.
Yeah. So there's that. There was residue of the cannabis residue found in Telerad in that archaeological dig. And if you read a book like Magic of the Ordinary by Gershon Winkler, it talks about recovering the shamanic in Judaism. And if we look at the religion of the tribe before we were even officially Jews as this earth-based indigenous style religion, more similar to Native Americans than this bookish Christianized form of Judaism that we're more familiar with today, that in and of itself is shamanic and psychedelic. And it's, really, I think what is psychedelic, if not something that connects us to nature and the cosmos and the stars and ourselves in that embodied kind of practice. And so you look at a holiday like Sukkot, where you're waving a bundle of plants around in 6 directions, and how our calendar follows the moon, and like it all feels very otherworldly, but right down here on earth. So I think, and also wine, like, and who's to say, I'm not sure exactly what the ingredient list was for wine back in the day, if there was other stuff that was in it. But those are just a few examples, I guess.
Right. There was someone who shared with me that wine was used as an astringent to draw out some other plants. Maybe it was blue lotus and like a...
Yeah, exactly.
In a...
Yeah. So what was the question, though, when I was giving you these examples for the Jewish psychedelics?
Yeah.
So we had, for instance, people talking about that kind of more like text-based evidence of entheogens. There was also people talking about mysticism, or people talking about inherited trauma and how psychedelics can help with that. Why Jews are so involved with drug policy as sort of like a tikkun olam thing. I don't know if you've ever been to like a weed conference or...
No. What's interesting is that I was
Jewish.
prior to encountering psychedelics, I was anti-drug for sure.
Oh,
Very
wow.
strongly so, yeah.
So you started out with psychedelics. You skipped weed and went straight to...
Yeah, I maybe had weed once or twice as a teenager, but didn't enjoy it, and wasn't
Yeah.
One paranoid experience later, I was like, this stuff is terrible.
I actually don't like weed that much personally. I mean, I smoke it here and there, but
and others didn't interest me at all. If I was at a party with friends and cocaine would come out, I'd leave. I mean, it was just...
So what psychedelic did you start with?
Mushrooms, really. Yeah.
It's a good first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was MDMA, mushrooms. Yeah, that kind of combo cocktail.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Today, only... for the last several years, only natural stuff: ayahuasca, mushrooms, peyote, San Pedro.
Yeah.
I prefer working with those, but I do see the I have seen profound benefit in a few MDMA experiences. Sometimes you meet someone who needs a hug from life, and I don't know that anything gives it like
That's
like that.
one of the best descriptions of MDMA that I've heard.
Oh, yeah.
A hug from life. It's my favorite substance. So.
Got you. Yeah, I mean, it's the most drug-like for sure because of the predictable nature of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But for the last few years, I've stayed away from that. I mean, ayahuasca definitely is my my medicine of choice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If all things being equal, yeah, that's a place where I've had my deepest healing, the connection, the clarity, the language feels like my own,
Yeah.
And integrating those experiences, I felt this had the most
When you do
profound
ayahuasca,
impact.
do you prefer the music or context being Jewish or like more indigenous style or combination?
Combination, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely a combination. But yeah, I find even with that, like the profound healing is with the indigenous, like the deepest work seems to be connected to the medicine that is most, I don't know, indigenous, I guess, to the medicine, those that they've been using for a long time. And then the kind of the peaceful interlude sometimes in ceremony, like, okay, put a nice nice Jewish song. Not only there's some medicine music that kind of has the same effect, it doesn't have the power.
Well, I feel like I've been in both, in Jewish and indigenous style ceremonies, and I've always asked myself, like, what's better for us as Jews? And I don't, obviously there's no blanket statement across the board, but, for me, I didn't grow up with nigunim all the time. So, like, being able to connect to Jewish music and ceremony was huge.
Right.
But for people who
There can be a traumatizing aspect of it. I've seen that
Exactly.
for a lot of people. Yeah.
And they need to be outside their comfort zones. And if their comfort zone is so Jewish, then like being outside that in with the Icaros and in that kind of,
I found sometimes where it can bring up unnecessary trauma because there's so many associations with
yeah.
those songs. So maybe it's trauma they have to work through, but maybe not.
Right. It's like something more neutral to not, yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely sat with groups. Like the first time I sat with ayahuasca, the group was, it made me extremely uncomfortable. Just how a lot of the practices and rituals, there was zero Judaism in that at all. But even, it wasn't about that. There was so much surrounding it that felt like not integral to the medicine experience that I was very uncomfortable with it.
Do you feel like that's still the case with ayahuasca when you do it?
No, not. I've found others to work with who I don't have that, but it's not the full Jewish experience. But it felt like it stripped out some of the shaman on a pedestal kind of vibe.
Well, ayahuasca comes with so much, I don't want to use the word fanfare, but it comes with, it's not just taking ayahuasca, right? Like it's not go to the forest and be alone. And I mean, I know they do that in the Amazon, but like you can
right
just
with
take
the shaman
mushrooms
and the
it's
ceremony.
just no fixings, no whatever. Whereas ayahuasca is a whole production. And so much of the experience isn't just that you're drinking the brew, but it's the whole space around it, the ceremony itself. So, yeah. And I think people are both gravitate toward that and are also turned off by it.
Right. So I've definitely experienced too much of it and too little of it. There's a kind of medium that I've gotten comfortable with where it's there, but it doesn't feel extra to the ceremony. I'll give you an example. So in one, there was an hour and a half of hoopla before the ayahuasca was even served. That just felt like too unnecessary.
What was the hoopla like? What was
I don't know, chanting and passing stuff around and just this whole ceremonial thing, which it's like, why is this necessary? It felt very much like shaman on a pedestal kind of thing going on. And a lot of it about building up his image and the way he was dressed. And I don't remember all of it, but I just remember being very uncomfortable with it. Like, what's a nice Jewish boy doing here?
Yeah.
But I've sat in ceremonies where that was completely removed and a lot of Jewish music, and I felt very uncomfortable in those. But ones where it had the indigenous stuff, but very integral to the experience. Like, okay, we're going to drink ayahuasca, and then the song that's going to be played is an Icaro. So that worked.
Yeah.
Not at the fanfare, but it didn't feel extra. It felt like integral to the healing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense.
I interviewed it a while ago, Yochi Ras, if you know Yochi?
Yeah.
So he spoke about the like kind of ceremonial music, and he's a musician and a psychedelic Jew, as he calls himself. And he spoke a lot about that, the kind of music that's healing and kind that's just not, right, just not for ceremony. So there's ones that are very medicinal and healing and have those qualities for sure.
I'd be curious to talk to him more about like what constitutes a healing song. Like what is the like what are the attributes of it that make it healing?
Right. I asked him that question. The way I recall, it was on the podcast, but he'd be worth talking to for sure. It seemed like a number of different sounds, right, kind of coming together. So oftentimes there's someone singing and a drum and a rattle. Like you're being hit from a few different sides versus, I don't know, an electrical guitar playing a niggin. I mean, it's kind of a weird combination when you think about it, but there are many who many niggunim like that.
I think there's something to be said when we talk about medicine music. We often think about specifically the ayahuasca, South American style music, and now that's being applied to nigunam and ayahuasca circles, but what about like the Grateful Dead? Like, why isn't that medicine music for acid? So there's all sorts of music, especially that could be specific to the substance that you're taking and how that, what the relationship is there.
And maybe it is, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think a niggin is that to a farbrengen. I don't,
Exactly, yeah.
And there are some, woven in, there are some which have been incredibly profound to have that connection and Judaism within it. I've felt deep connection, If a friend who loves to sing in ceremony and he'll out at the drum and he'll start singing niggin with it, and it's beautiful and it's nice and it connects on a deep level and has enriched Jewish ideas and feelings within me, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something that I feel is incomplete about our conversation here with the Jewish and psychedelic thing. Like more has to be fleshed out, but I'm not sure why I'm
that
feeling
just
that way.
occurred to me. I was like thinking like, what's something that I don't talk about enough in interviews that I really like to talk about or want to talk about? And I think it goes back to, we're talking about medicine music, and it's funny because the songbook, you've probably seen it, the Angel Heart songbook.
No.
It's a little songbook of rainbow gathering music that was put out by, I think, Shimon Lev Tahor, or there's a whole sort of, especially in Israel, there's a really huge medicine music scene, and it's like here in America and New York, I feel like I have to like be drinking ayahuasca to hear some medicine music, and when in Israel, when I'm there, I can just go to a circle, and then I don't have to be. It doesn't have to be a whole ayahuasca circle to get that, and so anyways, I'm seeing like this. So much of the lineage of the music I find comes from the rainbow gatherings. And I don't know if you're familiar with the rainbow, but
No.
it's this temporary sort of village gathering society in the woods, and it happens every year around 4th of July, or in Israel it happens in Cheshvan and over Pesach.
Okay.
And it's basically psychedelic ethos put into practice. It doesn't cost anything to go there. It's like the precursor to Burning Man, even like, and once you're there, it is psychedelic. It's like you're in a completely different paradigm, and so, and that's in and of itself is mind altering and soul nourishing and life changing. And Rainbow has completely changed my life since going. And there's a whole sort of Heimish crew who goes to Rainbow, and you're making you're baking challah in the woods from like a wooden oven or a wooden kitchen that was made. And it's just brings you back to it beats you down, and you're in nature without anything. Like all you have is your tent, no accommodations, no bathrooms, nothing. And you're dealing with the elements, and you're just stripped and just brought down to yourself almost. And you're also like relying on community and the way, especially in a situation where there's no money and there's no class and there's no, just you're dealing with everyone's basic humanity. And that I feel like that's what psychedelics also do for us, is bring us back to that elemental humanity. And Rainbow is a whole paradigm and, again, like temporary moment in society that expresses that. And, the world outside Rainbow is referred to as Babylon. And so whenever I'm around people I've been to Rainbow with, or they'll hear the songs that originate from the gatherings that have been going on now for 50 years, it brings me back to that type of consciousness. And so I think what I would, leave the audience with is like, how are we practicing psychedelic lifestyle? And again, Rainbow's a very extreme example of that. But I've learned so much about the application of psychedelics put into integration, like put as integration. And, that's the real medicine, is not the substance, but like what you do with the consciousness that it opens you up to after its acute effects wear off.
Yeah, in case it's unclear to you or anyone listening, this is my integration right here. So, meaning this, right, this podcast, everything else, yeah.
Exactly. I mean, writing a book was my integration.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, it's all. It's the seed for it is born there, and then it gets created and put into practice.
Yeah.
Here, what is wrong with keeping them separate? Why? What is left unfinished for you if Judaism stays as Judaism, psychedelic stays psychedelics? What's the benefit of the merge?
Not like about a benefit, it's just seeing that Judaism is psychedelic. That's actually another takeaway. It's like there's the benefit. It's like, okay, like I don't want to promote that people should feel like they have to take psychedelics in order to deepen their Judaism, or that they should have to apply Jewish culture, framework, or religion to their psychedelic experience if they're really just not religiously oriented. Like that's not what I'm trying to do. But I do I do feel like Judaism offers a container through which to have a psychedelic experience,
Without psychedelics.
with or without,
Right.
it's the set and setting for altered states of consciousness, like expanded states of consciousness. I mean, that's Kabbalah is like expanding your consciousness to realize there's four worlds and, Sphirot, and, that's on the most basic level. And Judaism itself is an expression of these altered states. Like Shavuos is like kind of memorializing like one of the most psychedelic events in Jewish history. And our integration of that is Torah. Like we received the Torah in a huge, in like this ecstatic psychedelic moment. And the integration is not necessarily ecstatic psychedelic, but like how do you take that light and like practice it and live by it? And that's what we have, which is I think so beautiful that our religion is kind of encapsulating psychedelic spiritual light into daily practice in a way that like we have the vessel for it, and we're not going to shatter our vessels necessarily, God willing, like so.
Okay, so I think I understand. So your kind of being, your kind of message is kind of your being, your message is a rebuttal of your parents' approach, which is the way to integrate psychedelics and this awareness and this conscious living. We can't find it in Judaism. We can only find it in Hinduism. And you're saying no, we can find it in Judaism.
I mean, I don't think my parents were saying we can only find it in Hinduism. I think I'm doing the intergenerational work of healing like their post-Holocaust trauma. They're coming from a generation where it was not cool to be Jewish. Like, let's just assimilate as much as possible. It's scary to be Jewish. My dad was targeted as a kid for anti-Semitism. He was like bullied and all sorts of things. And so there was a real fear of being Jewish in America for that generation. And then therefore a dissociation from Jewish identity. And so it was almost easier to find spiritual depth in something that wasn't yours, because what's yours is not safe as they were experienced it. And thank God, I'm growing up, a couple generations removed from the Holocaust, absent whatever past life stuff I have going on. And, it wasn't, I went to even my public school was like 75% Jewish,
Right.
so I can actually return to it and be like, wait, but this isn't ours. Like part of healing trauma is returning to yourself. And like, if trauma is associated with dissociation and like fragmentation of self and identity in your soul and your body, I'm saying, no, here I am. I have a Jewish soul. I also am born into a Jewish body. And like, how can I like live with that and face the pain, like the incarnational pain of being Jewish, including all of the inherited trauma that I do have. And
while still retaining a lot of the beauty that your parents have taught you, not having to reject that either.
Yeah, like taking like the spiritual heights that my parents showed me was possible and saying, okay, like rather than dissociate now from who I am, part of spirituality is returning to who I am, even if there's pain involved.
So that is true. The Jewish part of me is true. Let me bring it together.
Yeah, and my parents, it's so beautiful now seeing both
They're
of them.
supportive of it.
They are. My mom is now going to Shabbos every week at Happy Minyan, and I just took my dad to Israel, and he basically like was in heaven. We did Rosh Hashanah at Meron. Like
Awesome.
he is a total. He's drinking the Kool-Aid. He loves it, and it's just great. Like it's almost also very healing for me to see my parents reconnecting with Judaism, because I think so much of my life, I just, the message was not, oh, it's okay to be Jewish, or, I was in LA, my mom dyed her hair blonde and got a nose job. And like, even like physically, it was like, oh, you look Jewish, like that's a problem. And to just kind of be able to embrace that, and for them to embrace it just gives more permission, even though I don't need their permission anymore.
Right.
So,
but it does feel complete now. It feels complete to me.
It's
Meaning in this
getting there.
conversation and
We'll see where my generation, the generation I produce, goes after this. But yeah.
Right. Well, your parents taught you how to raise a nice Jewish girl, so
God willing, yeah.
so maybe you'll do the same. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I appreciate you
thank
coming
you.
out. I hope your book does amazing, and
Thank you.
hope it touches a lot of people. And
Amen.
yeah, I think it's beautiful how you're able to retain a lot of the beauty that you saw in your home growing up, not throw that out, and still
Thank you.
reconnect to Judaism. It's a
Thanks
beautiful
for
story.
seeing it.